responsibility at Aviva. We're an insurance company, that's right, you're in an insurance company. Hopefully it doesn't feel like it. We do investments, general insurance, pensions, those kind of things, but you're in our digital garage. This is where we do our digital disruption, and I think that's quite a theme for the day. How can we disrupt, how can we hack the SDGs? You're not the first people to hack the SDGs in this room. We've had hacks on disaster resilience here, on responsible investment, on environmental sustainability in our Singapore digital garage. So hopefully it's a really conducive space for us. So do join in, you're part of the hack team. In terms of housekeeping, toilets are just through the door here and on the right. You need an accessible toilet. That's a little bit further round the corner on the right. In terms of fire alarms, we're not expecting any today, so if the alarm does go off, we need to vacate the building. You can do that straight back to where you came in, through the fire exit, or if you can't get that way, you can also come this way and follow the green signs. The area to congregate is over in the middle of the square amongst all the boot camps, so just make sure you don't get hollered at to do 10 press-ups or something while you're at. But a very warm welcome, and I'll hand you over to Steve and the team.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome again to those of you that were here for our AGM a few minutes ago, and to those of you that have just joined us, again, you're very welcome. This event, Making Global Goals Local Business London, aka Top Down, Bottom Up, is part of a series of events that the UN Global Compact Network UK is running around the whole country. The idea for this roadshow event was really born from the information on this slide. In December 2016, Eurobarometer conducted a huge survey. They asked 27,000 Europeans the question, have you ever heard about the Sustainable Development Goals? And here's your answers. And way out ahead on the left is Finland, quite an impressive, over 70% of the population of Finland had heard of the goals. If you're scanning for the UK, look to the right. We came out dead last. So the worst level of awareness of this agenda across the entire continent. Really an abysmal performance. And for those of you, probably all of you come to this kind of event with some regularity if you're in the sustainability field. And I certainly go to a lot of these things, and I heard enough people standing up here saying, we need to get out of London and spread the word on this, but didn't see anybody doing that. And so we felt that we would take the bull by the horns. And as a UK network with a very clear mandate to drive the Sustainable Development Goals agenda to the UK business community, we were delighted to have the opportunity. So last year in 2017, we visited 11 cities across the UK. This year we're currently booked into 11 and probably be adding in a few more dates. We've already been to Winchester, Belfast, Derby, Leeds, London today, Cardiff next week, and in the autumn, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Edinburgh, Bristol, Oxford. So more to come. The response we get when we get out into the provinces is fantastic. There's a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm for this agenda, but they do need support, and we're happy to provide that. I'm gonna, oh, should have switched to that sooner. There you go. There's the dates. For those of you not familiar with UN Global Compact, it is the UN's Corporate Sustainability Initiative, and we are the UN Global Compact Network UK, and we are part of the world's largest responsible business initiative, connecting UK companies and other organizations in a global movement dedicated to driving sustainable growth. Global Compact is founded on 10 universal principles, UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor standards, environment, and anti-corruption. We have a rock-solid foundation, and obviously a direct link into the UN and Agenda 2030. It is our mandate to support the UK business community in their engagement with the 10 principles and the SDGs. And if you're not already a signatory to the Global Compact or a member of our network, then do please get a hold of me or a member of the team. Is anyone from the team here? There's Katerina and Mark at the back, and Nikki, of course, network chair, and probably chances are very good that the person sitting beside you is also already a member of our network. So do please reach out, and we'd love to have you engage with us. We have an action-packed program today. We're delighted with the speakers that have so generously given their time to join us. It is making global goals local business. So we're going to hear from Lord Bates to give us the UK picture, not so local, but in the global scheme of things, more local than global. And then we're going to hear from Paul Toyne to give us a London take on this. And then in our first panel session, it's the top-down part. And we want to explore from the perspective of a sustainability manager, director, how can you catalyze action from the top to move this agenda? What are the arguments that will work against the C-suite to get them to buy into this agenda and help you do your job with that top-down support that is so vital? And in the second session, we're going to flip it, and we're going bottom-up, and we're going to hear from 3 great organizations talking about what are they doing to mobilize employees, customers, and suppliers around this agenda. And we're going to put the squeeze on and get companies top to bottom engaged in SDGs and driving this agenda forward. Thanks so much for coming. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce Lord Bates.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. I realise that probably I'm not dressed for the occasion, but apologies for that. I certainly wasn't dressed for running up and down Hoxton Street in this weather trying to find a garage until realising it was Hoxton Square, of course. As most of you know, the UK was at the forefront of negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals 2030 agenda. We pushed to ensure that the SDGs are inclusive and ambitious. We made sure that the agreement reflected a pledge to leave no one behind, successfully pushing for a dedicated goal on gender equality. We also helped secure Global Goal 16 on peace, security and good governance, the building blocks of stable and successful societies. These issues remain key priorities for the government, and we will present our voluntary national review highlighting how the UK is working to deliver the SDGs at the UN in 2019. As we exit from the European Union, it's more important than ever that the UK faces outwards to tackle the problems at their source, rather than waiting for them to come to our doorstep. The SDGs provide a strong framework to tackle the global challenges of our time, including poverty and disease, mass migration, urbanisation, tax and transparency, inequality, climate change, and peace, security and conflict. In addition, our Secretary of State is keen to do more to strengthen our work on disability, modern slavery, and child exploitation issues that are all integral to the SDGs. The Department for International Development will be co-hosting a Global Disability Summit on the 24th of July this year to galvanise the global effort to address disability inclusion in the poorest countries in the world and to act as a starting point for a major change on this neglected issue. If we're to achieve the SDGs by 2030, we need to work in partnership with a wide range of stakeholders, but the private sector is key. Governments can lay the building blocks of economic development and create the environment for the private sector, but it's the private sector that creates wealth in society, creates jobs, and raises incomes, providing goods and services. Without inclusive economic growth and decent jobs, we will not achieve the global goals by 2030. DFID's Economic Development Strategy, launched in early 2017, commits us to work with the private sector to this end, to help transform the economies of developing countries, to help create more and better jobs, to provide economic opportunities for women, and to ensure that no one is left behind. As the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, we recognise that the UNGC is a key engine for driving change in business behaviour. DFID has been supporting the UN Global Compact since 2014, and we want to increase the number of businesses committing to UNGC principles for responsible business behaviour. We now require all DFID private sector suppliers to be members of the UN Global Compact. The strength of local networks is vital to the success of the UNGC's mission. You are the link that helps to make the global goals part of local business. The Department for International Development is doing a number of things to help business identify and measure how they can contribute to the SDGs. For example, by sponsoring the UN Global Compact for Decent Work platform, helping to mobilize businesses to achieve Global Goal 8. The platform provides information and advice on both identifying and tackling these issues where they exist in our international supply chains. We need to be open that abuses can occur and take action to address them rather than ignoring them or trying to cover them up. We need to establish an alliance of companies committed to taking action to advance this agenda. And this has been built, and I'm pleased to see global leaders such as Unilever, Safaricom, and Accenture have already become signatories. By creating private sector partnerships such as these, we can help millions of workers into decent jobs. Some of our programs are also engaging with businesses to identify and test innovative approaches that can contribute to the SDGs whilst making sound business sense. For example, in rural Pakistan, Reckitt Benckiser, producer of health, hygiene and home products, wanted to sell soap to poor people who couldn't buy but would benefit from the hygienic qualities of that product. DFID supported and helped them assess the market constraints and design a profitable business model. The pilot developed a basket of socially useful products, including oral rehydration sachets, sanitary napkins, and baby products, which contributed to a range of targets under Global Goal 3, good health and well-being. Following a successful pilot that reached 12,000 households, the company are planning to scale up the approach. We're also working with Pearson to support a transition to work program that provides employers in growth sectors such as IT with trainees. The project helps semi-skilled young people aged between 18 and 34 by providing mentoring and training at no cost to themselves, helping them to get jobs and keep jobs and increase their earnings, thereby again contributing to Global Goal 8. We also need to leverage investment to help achieve the goals. The UN estimates that the annual financing gap is $2.5 trillion. The City of London, as a major financial centre, our pension funds, can all play a key role in investing to deliver these goals. But getting the good return, too, in these markets is essential. What we're seeing is that both businesses and investors alike are seeing the goals and the opportunity to do good, but also a requirement for long-term financial return. We've scaled up our investment in CDC and the Private Infrastructure Development Group in order to attract investment opportunities, and we can contribute both to the SDGs and the commercial viability aspect of delivering them. However, there is more that we and you need to do if we're going to meet these goals in 12 years' time. We need to make responsible, inclusive businesses an investment exception. You are among the leading companies in this area, but now we reach out to you, to the free riders and the laggards, to change the way that they do business too. Recognizing and profiling good performance is one powerful way to signal to investors and consumers that you mean business about the goals. And that's why we're supporting the Aviva-led World Benchmarking Alliance to develop a series of publicly available league tables ranking business on their contribution to delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. The first benchmarks will be launched at the UN General Assembly later this year. By working together on this important agenda, we can drive better working conditions, support innovation, and leverage vitally needed investment to ensure that we create a more inclusive economy and one that delivers on the SDGs. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Lord Bates. Paul, would you take over? That's live. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. So, just a quick show of hands. How many of you have heard of the London Sustainable Development Commission? And I won't be offended if there's only one or two of you. Okay, so we've got a little bit more work to do. Okay, so let me give you a quick introduction there we go, of exactly who the Commission is. So, the LSDC plays an important role in promoting sustainable development in London, and it actually provides independent advice on the sustainable nature of London-wide strategies, provides that advice to the Mayor of London and to its statutory powers, those across the Greater London Authority. It was first established by the Mayor in 2002, and the LSDC comprises of key representatives from London's economic, social and environment and governance sectors who all give their time voluntary. So by way of introducing myself as Paul Toyne, who am I and how does this relate to the agenda? Okay, so I've got a background, first of all, starting off in not-for-profit, in the charity sector, helping establish tools such as the Forest Stewardship Council when I was working for WWF. I then became an entrepreneur. I set up a consultancy that still trades today called Article 13. And in that time, in 2003, we became members of the UN Global Compact. We were signatories to that. We supported the 10 principles. Fast forward a bit, so if any of you who've got a job title of Head of Corporate Sustainability or Director of Sustainability, etc., for the last 15 years I've been working in big business, mainly in the built environment, so in property, in construction, design and engineering, as a Sustainability Director, so for Lendlease, WSP, and just recently Balfour Beatty. However, I'm now independent, so I advise, and interestingly enough, as a non-exec director, we've already gone through the process of working and understanding how a business, an SME based in London, can actually deliver these SDGs. So out of those 17 goals, there's 11 where we've got really strong direct control. And more interestingly, a multinational business, a developer, working in Middle England, is actually now using the SDGs as a framework for placemaking. So how it can bring together its multidisciplinary parts of its business to create a quality of life and a benefit for society. So it's already happening. I'm very much part of that community, and so I'm delighted to be here. However, the LSDC is not just me. We have all 17 other commissioners. We also have a secretariat, and if you're not able to speak to me today, then Alejandro Colsa, if you please just stand up or show just behind you. There you go. So if any of this does interest you, do go and speak to Alejandro. So we do have a budget. We have a bit of a team, which is great, and so we strive to work on some strategic work as well, specifically on clean tech and also the gender imbalance and getting women into work in the clean tech. So, you know, not just at Old Street, but actually at the new campus at Imperial College over in Park Royal and places like that. We're working on green finance. What a fantastic opportunity we have for London to bring more investment in to create the kinds of infrastructure and success that we need for London. So we've got that, and we continue as an independent body, this is the Commission, to actually measure London's performance and quality of life. And it's really the latter that I really want to talk about, because it's so relevant to the SDGs, and I'll show you how. So, as a Commissioner, I've overseen 2 publications of London's performance around quality of life, published in 2012 and more recently in 2017. I think Alejandro may have some spare copies, but they are available on the website. So these reports go back to 2004 and actually give us a snapshot over time of how London is changing, sometimes for the good and sometimes for the worse, in terms of delivering quality of life for its citizens. And they're a key picture on that journey on how we can become a more sustainable city. So the last publication, 2017, draws on 32 socio-economic and environmental indicators. And it's quite a huge piece of work to do this analysis. But the idea is, and it has been used, it provides a guide to London's decision makers. So, for example, execution of the London Plan, how and where we need to make more effort to drive sustainability performance for London. So the idea is it's meant to be a useful guide. So what's it telling us? What are the useful headlines? Well, overall, many of those indicators are heading in the right direction, so that's good. So there's some positive stories, particularly around public transport use, economic productivity, volunteering, for example. However, and I'm a Londoner, I live in London, and so I'm very aware of this, it also shows some of the challenges, some of the more negative aspects of London's performance, particularly around social inequality. And I'm sure if you live in London or work in London, you'll see that. So there's some heightening gaps, widening gaps between educational outcomes as you move across London, likewise access to affordable housing, and then a continuing gulf, really, between the financial haves and have-nots, which is worrying. So through this type of analysis, we're able to identify areas where the trends are positive and good, and then we can ask questions about what are the right kind of policies to put in place to try and correct and change and improve performance in some of the negative aspects. However, it's a big job, so the responsibility of driving this is not just with a mayor, it's not with a commission, it's with a whole variety of different stakeholders working across the boroughs, businesses, central government and other stakeholders, including, as I mentioned, the private and public sector. So this report attempts to collate these existing indicators across those three interrelated areas, providing that holistic snapshot of London's quality of life. However, what next? Well, we've been looking at these SDGs and we think this is a fantastic opportunity because so many of our quality of life indicators are relevant and indeed match SDG goals to actually start to align London to measure its performance against the SDGs. And actually, if we can see some support and leadership from national government, if we can mobilise other cities, and we can see Bristol, Liverpool, and other cities taking some action here, we've got a great opportunity to start to measure and record how certain places are delivering to these goals. So, as a Commission, we will be giving advice to the Mayor on how we can transition between our existing quality of life indicators into the Sustainable Development Goals and their indicators, or an adaptation of indicators which is relevant for London. To do this, we're going to start on a process of consultation. And actually, we see this as an opportunity to engage with businesses and get to an understanding of communities in London, the business community, and how you're mobilising yourselves, how you are starting to consider this alignment, and to see if there's an opportunity moving forward where we can capture businesses' contribution in London to the SDGs. So to do that, we're here to help or hopefully gain your support to become part of a process. So we'll be engaging with London boroughs, we'll be engaging with members of the GLA, and we also want to engage with other wider stakeholders, including business. And our goal is, in the autumn period of 2018, to do this work. So in around late January, we'll be able to advise the Mayor on the transition, and we will start then to be producing sustainable development goals yearly or reports. So that's the idea. So we're really looking forward to seeing how business could contribute to this. We think it's quite exciting. So there's an opportunity. So if you are a business that's out there thinking that you'd like to help us with your skills, expertise, then please come and sign up, find us, the details are there, come and speak to me or Alejandro. Together, we can hopefully create an opportunity where London can demonstrate its leadership and its performance, and hopefully work on the things it needs to improve whilst we can celebrate some of the good things that it does. So thank you very much.
Okay, we're on to our first panel discussion. Could I invite Nikki and John and Philip and David to come
on time? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to say we are opening perfectly on time. So to briefly introduce myself and the panel, my name is Nikki Black. I am the chair of the UK Global Compact Local Network. So I chair a group of engaged and proactive leaders within the organisation, including David here, who's on the board. And when I am not doing that, I'm a director at an organisation called the International Council on Mining and Metals. We represent 27 mining companies that represent about 50% of global production. We're entirely focused on making mining safer, fairer and more sustainable. So I've been in the extractive sector for about 10 years now. I'm delighted to welcome the panel this afternoon, and I'll ask them to briefly introduce themselves, starting with David.
Yeah, so David Schofield, I'm the Group Head of Corporate Responsibility at Aviva. So I'm Group Head of Corporate Responsibility at Aviva, so I look after our responsible, sustainable business strategy across our global business. Yeah, I'll leave it there, I think.
Yeah. My name's Philip Ullman. I'm the Chief Energiser of the Cordant Group. Normally raises two questions. One, what's a Chief Energiser? You may be asking. Well, that is about treating business like a living organism, not like a machine. Fundamental difference. The Cordant Group, set up by my dad in 1959, a security company I joined in 1996. Turnover was 12 million. We employed about 1,000 security officers. In the last 22 years, we've fortunately grown it to a turnover of 850 million. We're now facility managers and recruiters. We placed 125,000 people last year. We are based in the UK and Ireland, all over Europe and in Australia. The reason why I'm here is because we converted the Cordant Group into a social enterprise in September of last year. So what that means in real terms, we've capped the dividends for the family, an absolute cap. We've capped remuneration at 20 times the lowest paid, and we're introducing profit-sharing arrangements. We're working with BWB to establish our social mission, and that's where the SDGs are right at the heart of what we're doing. The main one for us is number 8. We provide a lot of work, and we want to change the jobs to decent jobs, and it's a big challenge, but that's where we're focusing.
Wonderful, thank you. John.
Good afternoon. Is this working? Hopefully this is working now. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Elkington. I was once described as a human battering ram for getting the sustainability agenda into boardrooms. I spent 40 years working with business, most of it at the top team, C-suite, board level. Looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful, thank you, John. I don't think John shared his own title, which is CEO and Chief Pollinator. So when you go home and tell your loved ones that today you were at a panel discussion with an energizer and a pollinator, and
the boring insurance guy.
Well,
somebody in the audience just said it made me sound like a beekeeper. I've always aspired to keeping bees, but it's not because of that.
It's wonderful. So I just wanted to briefly introduce the topic and the format for this afternoon. As Steve said, we're really focused on, in this session, thinking about how you motivate engagement in the senior leadership of an organisation. If you are the person in the organisation tasked to do that or not. You know, we framed this initially as if you're a sustainability director or a corporate responsibility activist, but one of the things that I've increasingly seen is that this type of argument comes from an increasing number of different places within organizations. And just because you don't have a title like mine, you know, Director of Environmental Stewardship and Social Progress, or a Chief Pollinator, you might be, you know, Head of Accounts, and you could be doing absolutely transformative work in your organization. So what are we here to do? We are here to share actionable insights, to really inspire and energize and engage you, to pollinate, inspirate, and really let you leave here with some tools to deploy within your organizations. But at the same time, from discussions we've had over the last couple of days in preparing for this panel, we also hope to provide a space where we can reflect collectively on the bigger challenge that's set by the SDGs. I greatly enjoyed the presentations both from Lord Bates and from a national government perspective and from the London Sustainable Development Commission. What is it that the SDGs, which are indivisible, universal, apply as much in the UK, in London, in your village shop, as they do in New York or Dakar? What is it to deliver them? What is the challenge that is being set for us? And then to pull that down into, and what can you do? What can you do today? What can you do tomorrow in your organizations? So what I'm seeing, and what I've seen over the last 15 years, working in humanitarian action, in sustainability and different action networks at different levels, but particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, is that advocates within organizations have a bigger toolkit than they've ever had to talk about this agenda. It used to be that sustainability or initially corporate responsibility might have sat in the corporate affairs team. Maybe it was something your head of branding picked up, or maybe your office rep who was involved in community engagement would be doing stuff in schools about it. Now I find that in the member companies, we have about 1 million people who work for the 27 companies, the mining companies in our organisation. I find that I'm as often talking to the chief financial officer about the implications of the task force for climate-related financial disclosure as I'm likely to be talking to the General Counsel about the human rights risks that they're finding in the supply chain, as I am to be talking about the Chief Innovation Officer about battery generation and how it's going to require a total redesign of the mine, and then at the same time talking with the CEO about how they're going to square that with the South African government, because new technology might mean that 30% of the staff and the workers at a site in an area of 40% unemployment may no longer be required. But that allows us to hit carbon reductions and safety goals. So I think we're seeing more people involved in this agenda, and that people trying to, within the company, and people trying to push forward a change can pull on different tools: consumer activism and pressure, investor pressure, government and regulatory drivers. So that's what I'm seeing. What I'd love to hear from our panel initially, and I'd like to start, I think, from David, because really on the panel you're almost, we both share heritage industries. You're in a global company, a large multinational, which is often how people think kind of where this agenda is. So what do you think the challenge the SDG sets is, and what do you see people doing to really push the agenda within business?
Thanks very much. I think it's an observation well made about a lot of us are working now around distributing responsibility throughout our organisations. So those of us with an integrated sustainability plan type approach. We had a global conference earlier this year, similar to this today, and we asked for a show of hands of our community of practice, as we call it internally, and only 25% of people had CR or responsible business in their job title. So you're able to pull on areas of the business that can help you get at implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals that I think it's good to be honest, you can never get anywhere near from a CR team, from a CR bubble. So I think that integrated approach is huge. The SDGs have been a massive help, I think. They're a consistent framework that there's this massive consensus around. It takes all that wasted time and energy. Do you remember we used to be in a stage where everything went into mapping, and so much energy dissipated into mapping? We're now well beyond that. It's very clear to sit down with a board and be able to say, what are the issues here which have the biggest impact on our business, the sustainability of our business, and what are the impacts our business has on these issues, which of course are part of the same circle. And I'm pleased to say we've identified, I think, about 4 or 6, which are core to us, rather than going after them all, which I think a lot of people fell into that when they first picked it up. However, what I would say is the Sustainable Development Goals provide this compelling vision of the future, but the motivation to get there is realistically going to be internal for people, internal for the business, or internal for individual stakeholders that we're trying to engage. So I think it's a really useful tool for me to think about values, value and risk. So some people, and you need a real agility in the influencing. The board paper has to cover a lot of ground, and the engagement with stakeholders, because some people come at this from a values perspective. They instinctively get it. It matches their personal purpose and values, and that's great. And it's especially great when they're the CEO, and Aviva's lucky enough to have a CEO like that. Other people are really looking at the value. So how is this going to help us grow our business? And hopefully, I think we've nuanced this idea of growth beyond quarterly trading values into a much more longer term. What's the benefit of this business decision in 20 years? That's actually part of our decision-making framework here at Aviva. So value creation, and then of course what's sometimes treated as a dirty word with the SDGs, because we should all buy it because we're all Guardian readers, but actually risk is a useful conversation to have. You look at TCFD, you look at our risks as an insurer. Yes. Talking about the actual risks to do with climate change, whether they're kind of physical risks or the risks for our businesses from climate change. So 90% of people, I think, now are wrestling with those through TCFD. Actually, only 30% of those people publishing stuff, does that go beyond 6 years? If you look at the impacts of climate change on businesses over the longer term, they're huge. And we'd be crazy not to pull that risk lever, I think, as well as influencing. So that's my kind of feel for how it works in an organisation.
That's brilliant. Thank you, David. And I'm going to do my best to play acronym bingo. So TCFD, Task Force.
3 strikes and out. I'm 1 down.
So just a quiet reminder, and if there's something you don't understand, please shout out. This is very much an interactive session. Philip, I thought I'd turn to you now to see, is that your vision of the challenge that's presented to us, and where do you see the arguments working?
I'm excited by the SDGs. It's changed my life, genuinely, and I think we're looking at a complete, ultimately, transformation of business, as I see it. So at the moment, it's CSR, it's about marketing, and it has to move to a way of making decisions. It's about doing the right thing as a business, rather than purely a label that the business has. It's got to fundamentally become that. And what I see happening is we move from a model of fear and scarcity, which is where business currently sits, to a trust and abundance model, where we start trusting people, where we start building businesses around trust, and it's a fundamentally different model. Now, if we can achieve that, you can then move from competition, which is where we currently reside, to a model of collaboration. Now, to achieve the SDGs, there's not a hope of achieving, as far as I can see, in a competitive world. If we're competing with each other, if we're trying to crush the competition, rather than working together to achieve these SDGs, we haven't got a hope of making the kind of changes. So I think this is the time to move the model to a more collaborative model, which is the only way of achieving the changes. Now, in terms of what needs to happen, I've done a lot of thinking about this, a lot of reading, and to me, the business model has to change with 3 fundamental changes as far as I can see. And this is based on the work of a guy called Frederick Laloux, absolute genius, who's helped me focus my mind. The first change he talks about, which I'm doing in practice, is self-management. We've got to eliminate hierarchy in businesses. The trouble with hierarchy is the jobs have to be good jobs. When you have hierarchy, it makes it very difficult for the millennials to make a difference very quickly. So what we're talking about is self-managing teams of 10 to 15 people. Within the team, you have all the skills that you need to fulfill a particular service. So can come straight into the business and immediately make a difference because they're in a team that has a visible product. The second change is about wholeness. Many of us come to work wearing a mask. We can't speak the truth. We answer in meetings questions in the way we believe the questioner wanted to hear the answer. We don't bring ourselves to work. We're not wholly at work, and we have to change the model where the whole person comes to work, where we can tell the truth and we can get the full value from every member of the team.
So, just briefly before we move on to John, in terms of practical insights, you've taken your organisation through a very fundamental change in how it is constituted and the purpose that it is geared to, and how that is reflected in the returns to shareholders and engagement with other stakeholders. Are you able to share more on the process that drove that, and where there may be insights or lessons or reflections that would support and help people in this room who are trying to take their organisations? But I know that if someone turned up in my team tomorrow and said, you know, I'm here as a whole being, and we're gonna scrap Mickey, I'd probably say, okay, let's talk about it. But it's a bit of a change.
You're absolutely right, and it needs support from government, it needs support from lots of different areas to happen. But we were fortunate. I haven't come across many organisations that converted from commercial enterprises into social enterprises. It doesn't seem to happen very often, but I had a fortunate opportunity. I was offered an opportunity from the government in the healthcare sector. Deloitte suggested that we do it as a social enterprise. This was about a year and a half ago. I didn't know what a social enterprise was. I hadn't heard of it, so I looked into this, and suddenly I felt I'd struck gold. I suddenly realised this is what business is all about. And it was kind of an epiphany. I realised that this is what excites me, this is what should excite business. So what enabled me to do it was, luckily, there was a need for injection of capital into the business. And I injected a significant amount of my wealth into the business, and the only thing I got in return was a cap on the shareholder dividends. So I said, I'm putting money in, but in exchange, all of us are going to cap what we take, full stop, and use the rest for society. And that was a major breakthrough. Once that change had been made, capping of salaries is easier because it's a decent, fundamentally that doesn't happen easily. I was lucky that I was able to do it. It wasn't something that I planned, but it's lucky. But I think we need to work with all the institutions to create environments which make it a lot easier for this transition to happen, because if you're quite right, it's not going to happen unless you've got a visionary leader and you've got a governance structure which supports it. Because if the governance structure doesn't support it, it will get crushed. As soon as something goes wrong, fortunately, because I've got control of the business, I got that governance structure, but it's been tried elsewhere. And when something goes wrong, the shareholders, some will say, let's go back to what we know. So effectively, it's a company chief who's the divisionary leader, and you need a governance structure. And I think that, we'll talk about it a bit later, but there are ideas coming from France as to what one can do to create the governance structure will enable that to happen.
That's brilliant, thank you. So I'd now like to hand over to John. For those of you who don't know, John is the father of the triple bottom line, which you were saying to us yesterday you issued a product recall on very recently. On Monday. So for those of you who are familiar with the triple bottom line, we might call it John Stephen Hawking moment. Roll back on a very, very formative piece of thinking about reconciling the objectives of business. So from your Vista, 40 years of engagement with this topic, key thought leader and practitioner in the area, what do you think the challenge of the SDGs is?
Well, let me just start by saying, Lord Bateson, we're privileged that you've not only parachuted in, but you've actually stayed. And what I'm about to say doesn't apply to DFID, but it applies to politicians and the political classes in this world of ours and governments. And one of the things I increasingly find in working with business leaders is they are distraught. Because what they see is a political system that we basically inherited from the post-World War II period unraveling in front of our eyes. And I think it's probably going to accelerate rather than get better anytime soon. So I see Brexit as a symptom. I see Trump as a symptom. So all I'm going to say is that people are now looking to business to take the lead in a way that politicians once did. And I'm really worried about that. In fact, I was asked by two people earlier on today, can business fill that gap? And the answer is, they can try, they can do their little bits, they can give a vision, and they can do a bunch of other things, but they are competitive, they are operating in competitive markets, and they are not democratically elected. So that's the first point. The second is, business itself is benighted. What we're starting to see in many of the incumbent industries is CEOs and boards and C-suites under pressures from disruptive not even begin to understand. I'll give you one example. Leaders Quest is a social enterprise. Many of you will know of them. They take business leaders out into strange environments. So I once went with 140 top people from Barclays, including the CEO, to Kenya, to Nairobi. And these people were put in slums for 5 days. Similarly, they took people to Mumbai and put them in a landfill site, one, I think the world's largest landfill site. And the idea is to shock people out of their comfort zones and have them start to think differently. But they also take these top teams and leaders to places like Silicon Valley. And about 18 months ago, they took a group to Silicon Valley, including the chairman of one of the very biggest German car manufacturers. And this chairman of one of the very biggest car manufacturers in Germany asked to see Uber. And this guy basically considers himself like the German foreign minister. So they went to see Travis Kalanick of Uber, who basically said, can't understand why you're here, 10 years from now you won't exist. The very distinguished German chairman went to the restaurant with somebody who overheard him to say, fucking hell. I've been briefed on this, I've been told about this, I've read about this. This is the first time I understand the visceral level of the threat that is coming at us. So, we have a political system in disarray, we have a global C-suite, which is also increasingly in disarray, and the SDGs, I think, are an enormously useful tool, but by God, they're complicated. I can remember 3 things, triple bottom line or whatever. You test me on what number 11 is, what number 13, what number, I can do 17, I know partnership. But I think that we have a structural problem with the SDGs, which is they are blindingly complex when most people are coming to this for the first time. And part of what we have to do is simplify it for people. So I'm happy to come back on that, but just a few thoughts.
For those of you who are despairing now about what you should do, I just want to know that I'm keeping a tally, and just to quickly pick some of the things that I have heard just as practical examples. So we heard from David, a community of practice. Now, you don't have to wait for someone in your organisation to set up a community of practice. You can set up your own guerrilla movement of a network of people you know are passionate about these things and want to make change. One of the most powerful things I ever did when I worked at De Beers, the diamond company, for about 7 years, I set up a women in leadership network. Didn't ask permission from anyone, just thought, oh, a lot of us here, really like to know what everyone else is doing, got them around a table, and it ended up we were better informed about what was going on in the business in a commercial sense, quite apart from the diversity and inclusion debate, than almost any other group at our level. So set up a community of practice. Maybe you could suggest that's formalised, be recognised for that initiative. We heard from David about the need for agility, values, risk, being able to speak multiple languages and pull on different levers. We also, I think, my big reflection from both of you is, how do you, both Philip and John, how do you make this visceral? How can you bring this into your business and make it real to people? You may not be able to get your CEO onto a plane into Dubai, but you can certainly be exposing yourself to parts of your value chain where you know stuff might be happening, and bringing that back to the attention of the organisation. Something's coming up on child labour in a country you know you source a lot of your goods from. You just note it, raise it. So, fascinating landscape so far, thinking about practical challenges. I'm wondering, before we go on, does anyone in the audience have reflections or questions as they think about the scale? Yes, some roving mics, please. I see a couple. I want just to say, I'm going to, because I want everyone to have a chance, I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. So please say who you'd like to
into an organisation that literally talks jargon, that talks about processes and systems. And I agree with you, the language of people, I said earlier to somebody very senior in the network, it seemed to be New York-centric. It is not perceived by young millennials to be hitting the spot of what is relevant. And if we stop to think about it, if you look at recruitment figures into corporates today, most of the millennials are opting to go into the more disruptive sector where they can be, as you rightly said, self-managing, more autonomous, closer to their values. We've got to wake up.
Brilliant, thank you. Abdul?
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Lord Bates for having to take time to come to this forum. I think we need more government involved in the area of accountability, area of regulations, policies, to join the SDGs. It's not just the private sector or the NGOs that can get it done. It has to be done by the three arms of government and also the civil society. Now, the aspect you mentioned is about, about the challenges. And what I've just noted from the speakers there, first is that the SDGs models. The models. We've taken 2000 to 2015 was a long drive. We should not forget what has happened over that time and where are we today. 2013, 3 heads of states were on a high-level panel of SDGs to come out with a format that we're going to follow by 2015. And in Bali, they said global partnership. And my organization believes a lot in that. And one of the speakers there mentioned about partnership, the man incentive, I could say about it, and he also mentioned about the problem, which is government structures. Now, if we don't really deal with these issues, we'll be like the universities who have been having conferences for years, but they're just what we call academic tourists, because this all comes to the talk shop. Now we have just 12 years, and yet we put so much that we want to achieve. Today, even in the UK, we have people going to food bank. You have to remember that that's part of the system, part of society. Now, the government, the businesses, because we have 12,000 over under SDGs as members. And under the report of the UN, there is not enough we can say of achievement within the UN SDGs, but the achievement in terms of the relevance or the participation of the private sector. Now, how can it be done? When I mentioned about models, now we have a lot of organizations who are into anti-corruption. We have a lot of them who are into child slavery, child labor. What needs to be done? Sorry. What needs to be done, which I see, is that when we have the models, they can now come together in terms of partnership. And then you come out with relevance of what they've achieved so that others can see the importance of what is partnership. At the moment, now everybody feels insecure. One of us has mentioned there about issue of trust. Mm-hmm. These are the things, fundamental things that the UN will have said, let us build foundation. The foundation is partnership, and other 17 goals are just areas to build on partnership. So we have to remodel in terms of how we follow up on SDGs. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to take one more, because I saw there was one just here, and then I'll invite reflections from the panel. So I'll just take 3 together.
Thank you very much for those interventions. I represent the British Academy Programme on Modern Slavery. It's a programme that seeks to tackle modern slavery, human trafficking and child labour in modern business. And in fact, we've been tasked by the government to find non-regulatory ways of doing so. And what it seems to be emerging, if we look at both the research findings that are coming out, but also some of the criticisms that have been raised. So, first of all, there is criticism that there's a lack of private sector involvement, especially if we think about, for example, the Global Compact. And that's something we're going to be hearing more about this week. But also that there's very limited compliance around the Modern Slavery Act, or rather not really substantive engagement. Yet, when you speak to businesses, principally in the retail sector, as to what it is that has pressed them to engage around the modern slavery agenda, it does seem to be that there's been a shift of values at the very top end. That's one thing that's emerging. It does not seem to be coming from consumers. It does not seem to be coming from activists. And from our perspective, we want to understand that. We want to understand what it is that is causing possibly a handful of leaders to rethink their values and their mission. And equally, how can that message be transmitted across the sector in fact, across other sectors as well?
Brilliant, thank you. So reflections from the panel, if you have them. David? Philip?
In terms of the changes to institutions, I think fundamentally the forms of institution we currently have, whether it be government, democracy or capitalism, is a system that evolved after the printing press was created in the 16th century and was fit for purpose at a time. And that's when the company evolved, that's when liberal democracy, but fundamentally, with the speed, with the data exchange at the pace that it currently happens, it's now in an instant to expect institutions that were created for the printing press to work in the social, they're not going to work. And that's why we've got the problems throughout the world, because democracy hasn't caught up with technology. So fundamentally, these institutions need to be redesigned to fit the world as it is today.
So I'd like to, I want to pull David back in briefly and then go, but perhaps, and actually take a poll of the room, and I'm thinking of how to frame this question. So we've heard extensive systemic change. Everything has to be different. We're changing the organizing principle of the organization and the entire socioeconomic and political structure. Is it happening? Is it happening fast enough? You never step into the same river twice. You know, so yes, many of these organizations were created and the structures that support them were created a long time ago. But I would be tempted to argue that the business I left 7 years after I joined it was quite a fundamentally different business. So I suppose from John, just a question to mull over is, do you see it happening? Where is it happening? And is it happening fast enough? And David, is that your view? I mean, you've worked on these issues in this sector for a long time. Do you see companies healing themselves, changing themselves so fundamentally?
Thanks. So is it happening? Yes. Is it happening fast enough? No. Are we seeing a lot of people using the SDGs as a comms tool, a lens through which to put over what they're already doing rather than actually changing what they're doing? Yes, that's one of the biggest risks right now. I'm all for the roles of the prophet and the priest. So I love the fact that we've got in the room people saying we need a revolution. And I would probably be on that side of things, but I'm also committed to working more like the priest in the everyday life of the community of people in our businesses. I doubt if you ask people, would you like a world that the SDGs describes? They're going to say yes. When we ask our consumers, one of our consumers says a brilliant thing in one of our focus groups when we were talking to them about what we should do as a responsible, sustainable business. They said, I want my pension to create a world I want to retire into. Boom. She should work for a marketing agency. But so we are wrestling with those challenges. How do we create that in a system and in a market which is doing exactly the opposite? So Lord Bates mentioned the World Benchmarking Alliance. That's one of our big, bold plays. And it is actually making use of competition. I know Philip was saying we need collaboration, but actually competition is a reality. Look at the corporate human rights benchmark. Google it if you've not heard of it. It's the kind of first proto-example of these kind of benchmarks. That is benchmarking people's human rights performance, and to take the point around modern slavery, and making it very transparent. So as an investor, do I want to invest in a company that actually benchmarks quite well on resolution? Or is that because they keep, for goodness sake, getting it wrong and they're very good at the PR, but when I look at their rating on their processes and governance, I can see very clearly why they keep having to mop up. Now, as an investor, I've got a quite interesting and quite obvious decision about what kind of company I'd want to invest into. And that benchmark is doing that across a range of industries. And interestingly, it throws up interesting facts. So I think at the bottom right now on the human rights benchmark is Costco, and at the top is Rio Tinto. So there is some really interesting, really kind of innovative stuff happening around these issues. I just want to pick up finally on that point around disruption. So you are here in our digital garage, we are working in scrums, we are working in agile, we are deliberately trying to disrupt ourselves before someone else does it. And we must be able to do it because we're nearly 325 years old. So when people say, what are you going to do when there's no more cars being driven by people? Well, our answer is, well, there wasn't such a thing as a car when we started, so we can do it. But I would say for us who are working inside these large heritage organisations, there are opportunities in these new ways of working. Goodness knows we're sucking up venture investments and in-housing social enterprises and high social purpose startups who are disrupting, you know, these are some of the most fertile places for us to be having this conversation about what our organisations can do to disrupt themselves and deliver the SDGs. And some of our biggest steps forward have been at moments of fracture. So I really welcome this talk about moments of fracture, whether they're macro fractures like in the political environment or more local fractures like we lost a CEO in the shareholder spring a few years ago. And our new CEO stood up and one of the first things he did live on TV from Davos was say, our purpose is not to make money. Our purpose is to contribute, and our purpose is to defy uncertainty. And if we do that, we'll make money. And these kind of iconic things often grow out of these moments of fracture. And some of our biggest wins have been really tunneling into that. So I don't think those of us working in heritage organisations should be scared of this feel of fracture. We should get excited by it.
Brilliant. Thank you, John.
Is it happening? And do we need system change? I was sitting in Shanghai on the 27th floor of a skyscraper 3 weeks ago. And I was looking down at the river Huangpu, and I was reading, at that time, a study looking at what happens to Shanghai and cities like it if we get 2 degrees of global warming. Shanghai is currently the biggest, most populous city in the world. It has 24 million people. If we go to 2 degrees, and many governments are now gaily talking about 2 degrees, Shanghai loses land on which 11.6 million people live. If we go to 4 degrees, and some people are quite relaxed about that too, we lose 22.4 million people's homes in Shanghai alone. I've seen more construction in that city than I've seen anywhere else in the world. I turned to a Chinese government official the next day and said, am I completely misinformed and delusional with these numbers? And she said, no. Those are the numbers that we know are going to hit us, but we're just in a different model at the moment. So system change, easy to talk about. We have to do it. It's beyond most people's pay grade, but it's at the same time, it's happening all around us. And I think we're seeing both in, particularly in macroeconomics and with the new technologies coming through, the potential for profound disruptions that happen once in every 1 or 2 lifetimes. And they're going to hit us so hard in the next 10 to 15 years. And much of my life I spent in places like Silicon Valley, talking to some of the people who are developing things like artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, Internet of Everything, synthetic biology, all of these different things. And they're clueless about unintended consequences. They always assume that whatever it is that they're doing is going to change the world and inexorably for the better. So I think we are going through a massive set of dislocations. The consequences, social, environmental, economic, political, and so on, are going to be much greater than most of us currently think. Now, having said all of that, I'm an optimist. I think this is the biggest opportunity in the next 10 to 15 years, certainly in my working lifetime. And just a final point, sitting in the audience over there is a colleague, Jacqueline Lim, and she recently led a project that we did with the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, looking at what we call breakthrough business models. And there's this huge shift now inside leadership companies from thinking about the business case. How do we justify it to our board? How do we explain to our investors we're going to have to do something that's going to be a bit complicated, from the business case to business models? And I think that is a hugely, hugely important step. Most people in CSR, most people in the sustainability industry haven't a clue of what a business model is, let alone how their own company's business model evolved, let alone how you would change it. So we've got a task ahead of us.
So fascinating. The BBC recently, literally in the last few days, released a video where they were interviewing a man who's been doing a lot of spatial work with maps to surface and use data on the impacts of climate change on sea level rises. And so you can zoom around the world and scroll what's going to happen. So I scrolled to have a look, and on the eastern seaboard, what happens in Florida. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but Mar-a-Lago goes first, and most of Miami is underwater. Now, I was in Miami last month, and I just wanted to pick up on Philip's point around the nature of our economic system and the role of the private sector and the basis of competition. And just to kind of plant a question in your mind, which is, do you think that sustainability and SDGs are a competitive differentiator, or are they within or outside the competitive space? So when I was in Miami last month, I was in a room with 17 CEOs of global mining companies who get together twice a year to discuss the work of the organization that I'm proud to be a leader of, talking about what we can collectively do to transform mining for better outcomes for people and planet. Now, they meet on a pre-competitive basis. And they say, okay, what can we do together? And it's setting it, and we're moving in a really interesting way from agreeing a set of principles and standards to developing guidance to help people meet those standards. So, for example, 16 years ago, the organization said, we just will not mine in World Heritage Sites. There are only 2 countries in the world who have legislated not to allow mining in World Heritage Sites. And all of our members commit to not doing that. And then we provide guidance to help them meet those standards. We're now moving into innovative partnerships. So at the moment, we're working with vehicle manufacturers to see what we can do to catalyze innovation for safer, cleaner, lower carbon emission vehicles. So I think we're moving into different spaces on this whole agenda.
Once you start focusing on mission rather than shareholder profit, I don't care if somebody takes my ideas, because if the mission is going to be achieved, I don't mind who achieves it. So if I've got brilliant ideas to how I can give a voice to employees to ensure they get good jobs, why wouldn't I share it with somebody else? It's not about not being ambitious and not being very, using your intellect. It's about when you've got a good idea, sharing it, because it's the mission that we all share, which is SDGs. And we mustn't compete, because if we compete, we're wasting resources. If we share the good ideas, the mission alignment will achieve the SDGs far, far, far faster. That's the big change to mission.
So just briefly, I'd like to open it again to the floor, but first to just, and so please be thinking about the questions you'd like to ask. And we don't have to answer them all here. It'd be really interesting to hear your reflections in the room. But John and David, practically, you know, if I am a mid-level, you know, I'm 5 to 10 years into my career in this room, and I want to be involved in this agenda, what would your advice be?
I'm happy to have a go. Thank you. I mean, one thing that anyone who works at senior levels in business very quickly realizes is that historically certain functions have been dead opposed to the agenda we're talking about today. And they've tended to be human resources, they've tended to be chief financial officers, they've tended to be brand managers. All of these people have felt historically that what we're talking about gets in the way. So that's changing, and it's no accident in a way that Paul Polman was a chief financial officer, my co-author on a recent book, the previous chairman of Puma, chief financial officer. That breed is waking up. HR people are still struggling with it a little bit, although the millennials are beating them up and bringing them squawking into the 21st century, which is a good thing as well. But I think get out there and talk to some of your senior colleagues and just engage them in conversations. Now, it may seem tough, but it's amazing how many of these people operate in complete bubbles. They don't have conversations with the wider world. And one of the things, I was once described as a corporate therapist. I don't do therapy, but there's an element of that. If you can get access to these people with the right sort of circumstances, you can get into places that you would never have expected to in terms of conversations about where the agenda is going, what the company might do about it. And just back to the political and governance element of all of this, one of the other big functions that stood in the way has been government relations, because these people think they've got government sewn up. And the number of people in big companies I've talked to just say, back off, we know how to deal with government. talk to those people too. Talk to your industry federations. ICMM is a bit of an unusual, a mutant, but that's a good thing. Evolution feeds on mutations. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the public policy guys is an interesting one, because actually our argument is if we create an environment where the good guys win and the bad guys lose, that's good for us, right? And if it isn't, maybe we've got some soul searching to do. That's quite an interesting conversation. I'd say three things. One of the biggest things you can do is use their data. So none of this kind of fluffy stuff, none of this, you know, copying and pasting into your board paper directly from The Guardian. Some of the biggest wins we've had is getting in and saying, look, do you realise that $80 trillion worth of investment under PRI to be had from us, you know, in terms of capital? Look at all your consumer data, look at your customer insight data. Very often people will say customers don't care. The point is they haven't asked them because they've got a blind spot. Dare to ask them, put your funding into asking them, and then you find these wonderful, wonderful unlocks. People, yeah, I mean, workforce of the future, if your HR guys are doing anything on workforce of the future, this is going to be top news for them. When we spoke to our MD of digital for the whole of Aviva, his biggest issue is attracting millennial digital talent. And this whole agenda, the connection with purpose, is absolutely what it's all about. So use their data, and there's a lot of good regulation coming through as well, which is very helpful. Secondly, on that point of connections and John's point about conversations, honestly, have a conversation with someone and ask them how they'd like to behave, what they'd like to be true, how they'd like to lead, the kind of legacy they'd like to create in the organisation and in the world. And all of our best engagements, whether it's senior or mass employee engagements, are those moments where people genuinely feel connected to the higher purpose of the organisation. Now, you need a compelling higher purpose, but if you've got that, and many of us have in our heritage, if you're a heritage business, and people feel connected to that, not only do they love working and they'll do the best work of their life, but they're going to be doing things which are genuinely socially useful that they're proud about. And that is a game changer, and that's what the disruptors have tapped into, and that's why they're disrupting us. And then at the final point, very, very briefly, I think one of the biggest hacks is diversity. So you have heard on this panel divergent views. Most of the bits of our organisation, or most of the organisations I observe who are really making a march on this, have got a lot of difference that they're welcoming into the tent. And I think that is just unbelievably transformative when you can unlock that. Yeah, and I totally welcome John's point about business models rather than business cases. It's a subtle change in the wording, but it makes a whole lot of difference in terms of landing an argument with the C-suite.
Brilliant. We've got about 13 minutes left, so I just wanted to get a sense in the room. What are you thinking? What would you like to know? And I'll take a couple again, so please keep thinking.
I'm Uday from Accountability, and this question is to the panel. We earlier spoke about the importance of visionary CEOs in driving the sustainability agenda, and the SDGs go up till 2030, and most CEOs, if you take the top 250 companies, their performance is assessed on quarterly financial objectives. And given that the top CEOs' tenure is now less than 5 years, how do you really get buy-in from these CEOs, given that 2030 may be even beyond their tenure? Thanks.
That's great, thanks. A couple more, right in the back.
Hi, Philip mentioned earlier about governance and good governance in this area. What does that look like?
That's governance within the company? Okay. The back row over here.
Hi, I just wanted to come back to a point John raised, coming back to the SDGs. What more can be done to simplify the SDGs and get us all focused on the right thing to do?
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got simplifying the SDGs. What does good governance look like? And then this challenge around quarterly earnings drivers, and how do we get around that?
I think we can learn from the work that's happening in France at the moment. Emmanuel Macron got into power, and he recognises the challenge. So he's really full steam ahead at the kind of changes that we need to do here. So what he's done, he's got a piece of legislation he's working on at the moment, which removes the primacy of shareholders. He says the primacy of a company is there for society and for the environment without primacy given to shareholders. That's the first change. But the thing which is really interesting is he's introducing a concept of a mission-led company, which I think Lord Bates, if we can look at it in the UK, it's incredibly powerful. So what he's saying is every single company, listed companies, should have a social mission, a raison d'etre, which it publishes. Which of the SDGs are they going to take responsibility for resolving? And in terms of how you hold the CEO or the chief energizer or chief pollinator, according to what you want to, effectively has to be given the space to deliver that mission. And the system, the quarterly shareholding, doesn't give them the space. You need to give them the space to innovate. You need to give them the space to create without them being crushed by fund managers, by activist investors. So what you then do is you create the space. You then have a regular impact measurement by an independent party to hold the CEO and the board to account for the mission that they've publicly declared. And then you have, so that's the reporting. You appoint an advisory board which has representation of all stakeholders. This is almost a new form of democracy. You then have representation of employees, of consumers, of the community. And they hold the CEO and the board to account for the mission that has been publicly declared. And then all of these things where you get people like General Electric, where people want to do the right thing are prevented from doing them, they are given the space by a governance mechanism that allows this to happen. And it's happening in France, and they've contacted us because Macron realized how big this is, because if they get it right, they will just start taking the lead. So fundamentally, we have to look at something along those lines to free up the visionary leaders and to give them a governance structure that facilitates the change.
It's interesting. I really support that point, but I think there's a real risk that Macron and France will fail because, you know, in a way, that approach so closely aligns with French political culture and expectation of business. So in a way, let's celebrate them, let's support them, but actually I think this is something that it needs many more people to move in the same direction. Paul Pullman was mentioned earlier on because of his new role at Unilever, sorry, at UNGC. He's somebody I've worked with over 20 years or more, and I think the fact that Unilever was almost acquired by Kraft and Warren Buffett and so on recently raises a very real question over governance in this country and in others, in the sense that, you know, companies that try and do the longer term thing get pummeled and get quite often acquired. So I think we've got to, you know, we were talking about system change earlier on. I think we've got to, we got so wedded to the idea that shareholder primacy is the way to go, that I think we've got to address that one head on. It's very difficult to work out how beyond some of these things like France attempting, we yet do that. I think it's going to come out of casualties. I think it's going to come out of conspicuous failures where companies just go off the rails because they don't think longer term, and therefore they miss competitive challenges, they miss changes in their environment, and so on. One final point on SDGs and their complexity, since I sort of raised that. I don't mind 17 things being there, because as a checklist, as a map, those are quite helpful. And the SDGs actually properly, in a way, symbolize the complexity of the problems that we increasingly deal with. And I think increasingly, if you think about the sustainability area, and you think about things like antibiotic resistance, plastics in the oceans, space debris, climate change, a complete data tsunami is coming at us, more and more of these challenges are what some people would call wicked or super wicked problems. They almost seem to resist solution. And therefore, that's why I think modern forms of IT and possibly artificial intelligence start to crawl into the frame. And that's part of my next focus.
That sounded suspiciously optimistic.
Yeah, it did, didn't it? I mean, I think I really take the point around, you know, capital is a competitive sport. lot. And to your point as well, Philip, working with the World Benchmarking Alliance, supported by a number of governments, actually, I think government action is huge in this case, and we've got some interesting developments around corporate governance as well in this country around whether we reinterpret fiduciary duty, or rather properly interpret fiduciary duty to more than just the financial benefit of the shareholder. But I think that's exactly what we're trying to do with the World Benchmarking Alliance, because, for instance, if all companies had to publish what they're trying to achieve in terms of the SDGs, then when Kraft come in to buy Unilever, the public, the government, the people who give us companies license to operate would be able to see, who do I want to own this prized national asset? I think that would be a fantastic level of transparency for us to get to, and we can do meaningful things about that. Just a couple of points on the kind of, what happens when there's a change of CEO and the governance point. I think they're very, very aligned questions. So certainly from our perspective, really good, solid board level governance around this is really, really important. And having that bedded into some of the more boring bits of a business, but that are hugely helpful, that provide the kind of buffers down the side of the bowling lane in terms of your business standards and risk approaches. I know it's not sexy stuff, but it's hugely important for us in these spaces. And actually, if you look at a lot of the corporate failures, that's where the corporate failures have happened, because there's unchecked personalities operating on pure profit motives. So the check on that within an organisation in terms of governance is huge. It has to be board level and it has to flow right through. But also informal as well. I love it when we go out and make public commitments to stuff. I love that, when we nail our colours to the mast, because that also is a form of longevity to this. And a really top tip is working with the chief people officer, whoever they are. John mentioned they're not always on board, but whoever's going to be in charge of non-exec recruitment, whoever's going to be in charge particularly of the appointment of your next CEO and your next C-suite, they are one of the top people on your list of people to influence if you want longevity of this agenda so it can evolve in your organisation.
That is brilliant. Thank you. So we are almost out of time. I hoped we'd managed to touch on another couple of things. I'm particularly interested in people's thoughts on culture, what a leader who's really effective on this agenda looks like, how you create an enabling environment where, if you are that person who wants to have the conversation with the CFO in the lift, do you have an environment that lets you do that, or do you find that you then don't go anywhere in the organisation? You have to find a way out. How does that play out? And before we go, I just wanted to really, given our time, ask the panel for one last actionable tip. And I think another question to ask perhaps is based on the conversation David and I had. Given how complex these 17 SDGs are, is it actually about the SDGs, or do you translate that into the language of your own business and it's your thinking process, but you may not link it to the SDGs in the end? But that's a question for another day. So final one or two things that you suggest people could do from today.
Okay. Yes, so for me, by 2025, 75% of the workforce are going to be millennials. And they are going to use the decision they make as to who they're going to work for and how they're going to consume to make change. So if you go to the board, start the conversation, tell people on the board, if you don't get this right, you aren't going to have a business in a few years, because millennials will not work for you. And it's happening the whole time. We're offering jobs. Millennials are saying no. They won't work for banks. They're saying they don't want the jobs. They are choosing, like we've never seen it before, they say no. So this is really going to happen. And people that don't take note of this are going to miss it, because the others are going to take the advantage. But the millennials are going to force the change through by purchasing power and who they work for.
I might jump in because we're saying the same thing, I think, Philip. I was going to say organisations are people, right? So one of the problems with some of this conversation is it in a strange way, it's dehumanised. And I think rehumanising this conversation and rehumanising business is at the heart of it, a lot of what we're trying to do, because that puts us in touch with all the motivators we need to
shift, because it's fundamentally about people changing their behaviour. So 88% of our people think we're a good corporate citizen. If you're one of those 88%, you're 60% more likely to be proud of Aviva. You're over 40% more likely to recommend our products and services to your friends and family. This is not just about attracting talent into our organisations, it's about having organisations able to deliver the kind of shifts we're going to see, and organisations that I would want to be part of. So I think it's about people fundamentally.
Just before I hand it on, I think David just illustrated a point I was going to make, which is don't travel alone. Find your network, find your connections, and David just illustrated the power of getting on the right side of your chief person officer or chief kind of HR director is, because if you can get those questions into the annual staff survey, you are able to surface the voice that you would want to be heard.
Because it's actually the right side of 27,000 people.
Yeah.
Not just the person with the big time.
And finally, John.
Well, support your local sheriff, support your local chapter of the UN Global Compact, but you asked earlier on, Nikki, about the dynamics of meetings and networks like this. You know, I don't mind people joining the Rotary Club or the Mafia even, as you know, they get sort of social benefits out of it, but we all live in our bubbles. And I think what we've all got to do is get out of those bubbles and engage people who think very, very differently to ourselves. And you do your organisation a service when you do that, and to have other people challenging the way you think and what you're actually advising internally.
John, Philip, David, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, panel. Everyone, we have a 20-minute break scheduled now. You will find coffee and tea and presumably other good things back in that room. We're going to get started again at 10 to 4